Management Research. Hello and welcome to the Management Research podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Eugene. Hello and welcome to the next episode in my mini-series dedicated to the questions of strategic management. And today we continue elaborating on this SWOT analysis, the very popular tool which most people like and I criticize. In my previous episodes, I talked about why I'm criticizing the SWOT analysis, and don't get me wrong, I like the tool if it is applied correctly. In our previous episode, we talked about how to have a better structure, how to introduce a better structure into our SWOT analysis, and we talked about the strengths and weaknesses, and that they can be best addressed by the resource-based view and capability-based view of the firm. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the opportunities and threats, the two quadrants. I argue that the best way to address them is through the market-based view. And to be very structured and very clean and have a model that is established, I would go for the 5 forces framework by Porter. As you know, about I think 24 of episodes of my previous episodes were dedicated to the 5 forces framework. Theoretically, the framework is very simple. You have the 5 forces. You have the rivalry among competitors. You have the threat of new entrants. You have the threat of substitutes. You have the bargaining power of buyers, and you have the bargaining power of suppliers. Some people say in this Van Grant and Jordan that we need to have 2 more forces in this framework, which would be the government, as it can impact all the 5 forces in the original framework, and the complements, because it is something that plays an opposite role to the substitutes, and it can also shape how your market will look like. Now we have already a good starting point. We have the 5 forces, or maybe 7 forces, and these forces shall help us understand what are the opportunities and what are the threats on the market. Let's take, for example, one of these forces, the substitutes. If your product has some unique components, for instance, if it is using the rare earth elements which cannot be easily substituted, then the threat of substitutes is pretty low. If you have something where you have unique characteristics and not so many products of this type offered on the market, if your clients are not prone to substitute this type of products, let's say not everybody would like to substitute butter with margarine, then you have great opportunities on the market and not so many threats. The opposite is true if your product can easily be substituted and if people in your market niche are prone to substitution. Let's say if you take the tourism market, people can easily switch between different types of countries. They can go to Alps, to mountains, but if it is too expensive, they can go to Carpathian mountains, or they can even go to whatever, to Turkey or Bali and spend their winter not in the mountains with snow, but let's say somewhere on the seaside with a nice view over the ocean. As you see, you can apply the 5 forces framework, and each of the forces can be analyzed, and you can see whether this force offers you some opportunities or brings with it some threats. But it is not sufficient just to think about what are the substitutes. You need to look into the nature of the substitutes and nature of the rivalry and nature of the entrance, how firms can enter a firm and why do they have to enter. And for this, I recommend you to read through the drivers that have impact on these forces. In our previous mini-series dedicated to 5 forces framework, we discussed several drivers. I think about on average 5 to 7 drivers for each of the forces. And if you analyze these drivers, you will understand whether you have to deal with a threat or an opportunity, or something ambiguous that can be both a threat and opportunity depending on your position on the market and what you're going to do, what you will do in the next step. I give you an example what you can investigate. For instance, let's take one of the drivers of bargaining power of suppliers or of buyers, depending on where you are in the scheme, and it is the amount of information. And imagine I gave you an example that the more information the buyer has over supplier, the more bargaining power has the buyer over supplier. The more the buyer knows how exactly something has been produced, the better he or she can negotiate. He or she will understand the costs and will try to push you to the lowest margin over the costs. If they don't know how you came up with the service or the product, then you have a much better power to negotiate. It of course depends on several factors, but let's take the simplified example. And the simplified example is the haircut salon. If you go to a hairdresser, you can observe all the movements, everything. There is almost no information asymmetry. The only thing you don't see is what happens on the back part of your head. Otherwise, you see all the movements, all the technique, all the tools that are being used. And in this event, the hairdresser have very low power, bargaining power over the client in your event, you see. An opposite example that I used was a website developer. You can show the website that you developed, and the buyer doesn't know how you did it. You just come in 2 weeks or in 2 months and show the result, and they don't know how much time you spent, what kind of knowledge was there. You can surprise them by a nice design and graphic, but maybe it was even a prepaid or even simplified free engine for the website. Based on this information, where you have sufficient information or not sufficient information, you will see your business model. You can see what are the opportunities for a business model and what are the threats. So, going back to what we have, the opportunities and threats. The best way to address them, I argue, is the market-based view, and in particular the 5 forces framework. And for each of the forces you have several drivers. Some of them I mentioned in my podcast, so just go through them and you evaluate them. Then you can write them down. It will be many opportunities, because for each force, for each driver, there will be different opportunities and threats. And when you have written them down, then you can again prioritize them, range them, and select the most important or the most dangerous threats, the most important interesting opportunities, and write them there down. Similar to the previous episode where we talk about the strengths and weaknesses, it's not only about the importance, it's about the different dimensions. You can also look about the more profitable options, or maybe the option best fitting your current situation, your current products, and so on. So the way how you prioritize may be multidimensional. Think not only about the money that you can earn, but maybe about something else that is important to you. Let's say continuing the type of products that you always have been doing and you want to stick to them. So maybe there can be an opportunity on the market that is just lost for you because you didn't plan to produce a new type of products. In this event, although it can be very profitable, I wouldn't list it, just because it is something we will not need for the development of the strategy if we deliberately decided not to go there. With this in mind, we have a nice and clean structure and have a good, profound approach to how we can list the threats and opportunities. And in the next episode, we're going to think about how to match the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats with each other in order to get a better strategy. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was useful. Wish you all the best. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.